Good afternoon and welcome to this Experian Marketing Services webinar. My name is James Murray. I'm the Digital Insight Manager here at Experian Marketing Services, and today we're going to be talking about successful campaign planning around the Olympics. So clearly the Olympics is a massive event, something which a lot of people have an invested interest in. But even if you're not a direct sponsor of the Olympics, you certainly will understand that there's going to be a lot of interest online about what's going to be happening in the run-up to the event. And so this webinar really is to show you how you can maximize that opportunity and get the most traffic to your website during this key period. There's three things which I really want to focus on today. And so we have sort of three very broad buckets which are going to form the basis of this webinar. The first of those being search, how you can use the Hitwise search tool to really maximize the different keywords which people are using online and how you can get traffic from those. The second one is the differing marketing channels and affiliates. And for those of you who are familiar with the clickstream tool, we're going to be going into that in a bit more detail today. And thirdly, we're going to be talking about demographics. How do you understand the key people, what kind of audiences are really interested in the Olympics, and how can you make sure that you're talking to the right people at the right time in order to get better targeting for your marketing dollars. So the first one, obviously, we're going to talk about today is search. Now, before we go any further, when we were doing some of the research ahead of this webinar, we called up a number of clients, and we wanted to understand what the key pressure points and what are the key pain points for people around the Olympics. And one of the things that kept coming up, and one of the things which we wanted to address, was the whole thing about the very tight, strict control which the London Olympic Games and the organising committee have around the branding of the Olympics. So what I've done here is actually I've taken a little excerpt from one of the white papers which the London Olympic Games Authority put together around the protected branding which they have for certain words all to do with the Olympics. And so the key thing to take away here is that if you are not a not a sponsor of the Olympics and not an official partner, then you're not allowed to use certain expressions which use two or more words of the ones which are listed in that list there. So, for example, you can't combine phrases online and start bidding on terms online for things like London Games or 2012 Games or Summer 2012, something like that. And so really in a bid to be proactive about that, to make sure that you're not falling foul of the system, Hitwise can really help you there in terms of doing some negative keyword matching. And what we mean by that is you can have a look at all of the different variations which are included for, as I've done here, having a look at search term variations for Games 2012 in the last 12 weeks. And you can see that by running this report there are over 11,800 different variations of search terms which include those two terms in a particular variation. And therefore this would be words which you wouldn't want to incorporate into your search campaigns. So by running these reports within Hitwise, you can get a whole list of terms together which are not going to be useful for you, or rather that you're not allowed to use in your search campaigns, and then you can focus on the ones which are legitimate by looking at using the exclude function in Hitwise to give you the lists which are keywords which you can use. So I wanted to give you an insight into how we can use search, and there's the two broad ways of doing search is to understand what went on in the past to try and understand what's going to happen in the future, and then the other way is jumping on faster moving, faster emerging trends to make sure that you're really capitalizing on new traffic. So this first example is a nice retail example. It looks at the Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games. So the branding for this and the sort of the game franchise is something which has existed since the Beijing Games in 2008, and then every Olympics that comes up, whether it be Summer or Winter Olympics, they bring out a new Mario and Sonic game. So the interesting thing here, we know obviously that ahead of the Summer Olympics there's going to be a 2012 version of the Mario and Sonic game. We can look at what happened at the last Winter Olympics and divine from that what the trends were to try and capitalize on that and see how we can really capture the traffic at the key times. So for the winter game, and this was in sort of tapering over 2009-2010, searches started like well in advance of the launch of the game. So as early as August, ahead of the October launch, is when people started to search for the new Winter Olympics game. Then there was an initial peak in searches when at the middle of October when the game launched, but actually the highest peak for demand was during Cyber Monday, which was the biggest online shopping day for Christmas. So people wanted to get this game for Christmas. Then there was a secondary spike much later, and this was actually during the Olympics itself. So there was a sort of a second buzz of life for this game when the Olympics was happening. If we look forward now, fast forward to this year, the London 2012 version of the Mario and Sonic game, we can see sort of slightly similar patterns. So when the first spike was when the game launched in November last year. Then again, another sort of peak around Christmas searches as people wanted to buy the game for their kids. What's really interesting is that we've already seen searches starting to pick up in anticipation of the games. So 5 months ahead of the ceremony, in February is when we started to see and that sort of secondary spike. And that's something which we've actually continued to see increasing, and something which we would expect to really peak even stronger over the next couple of months. What I want to do here is just highlight some of the ways, some of the interesting trends which have gone on in the ways that people are searching for the Mario and Sonic games. So on the right-hand side, I've looked at all of the top recurring keywords around the Mario and Sonic game, and some of the sort of key things to pick out here. 32% of all searches for Mario and Sonic included the word London, and so clearly that's something which is looking ahead to the latest game. But even though the Winter Olympics game is now over 3 years old, 12% of all of the searches for Mario and Sonic also included the word winter, which really shows you the longevity of this franchise and how people want to play games. Maybe they want to get a bundle of the two games together and not just buy the latest one. Consoles also played a very important role in the way that people were searching, and in particular the Nintendo consoles, so the Wii, the DS and the 3DS, received a lot of searches around this game, and the Wii in particular received twice as many searches as any of the other versions, and in particular the DS version of the game. Outside of searching for the game in particular, what people were starting to search for were some of the events which were in particular quite popular parts of the game. So for this one, fencing and javelin were the most searched for sports attributed to the Mario and Sonic game. So where's the search opportunity? And what I've done here is have a look at over Christmas. As we said, that was sort of a key time when people were searching for this game. The retailers who were selling the Mario and Sonic game obviously had a very invested interest in making sure that they were receiving traffic from the top search terms. So I've chosen 2 of the top retailers over the month of December, Amazon and HMV, who were receiving traffic. But what you can see here is that Amazon was receiving nearly 5 times as much traffic as HMV was. And the reason for that was that they were much smarter about choosing the key search terms, not just the most prominent search terms, the one which had the highest volume, but also those search terms which we call are in the long tail. And what we mean by that are search terms which have still quite a lot of volume, but perhaps not in the sort of the top 100 search terms, but are still sort of very important in terms of driving traffic in the sort of the minority, rather than just focusing on those top few keywords. And so actually when we start to look at it, these keywords here are all terms which Amazon received traffic from, which HMV received no traffic from whatsoever. And so you can see in particular a very sort of detailed keyword, something like Nintendo Wii console blue with Mario and Sonic Olympics, is not going to be right up the top of the list in terms of search volume, but was nevertheless a sort of an important keyword which Amazon was receiving traffic from, which HMV just hadn't considered. And so just to sort of highlight that, one of the things that we see in Hitwise is sort of how many individual words people are actually using when they're searching for particular items and products. Mario and Sonic is quite an unusual one because you can see on the right hand side here, most searches online contain just 1 or 2 words, and actually only 15% of searches contain 5 or more words. The fact that this is such a sort of a cumbersome and lengthy title, the Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, this is a lot of long tail searches are involved around this, and these attract a much lower paid rate than we would expect around other games, for example, say Fallout 3 or Uncharted or something like that. And so because of the nature of that, being able to invest in the long tail keywords, the ones which receive sort of lower volume but are still nevertheless significant keywords, they either present a really good opportunity for cheap paid rates or present a good opportunity for organic SEO rankings. And these ones here I've just highlighted are the ones which identify some unusual trends in terms of the cheats and DS, something where there was no paid rate at all, and therefore a really good cheap way to get free traffic. So I spoke about the sort of the 2 broad ways that we can use search in order to gain an understanding or an advantage in the run-up to a big event like this. You can either look back at what happened historically to predict what's going to go on in the future, but there are certain things that you can't predict, and then you just have to be able to react to what's going on online. And a good example of this is something which we saw in early January, ahead of the Olympics, quite a long way ahead of the Olympics. We started to see a massive trend in people searching for Olympic property rentals. And so in fact, between December and January, there was a 300% increase in searches for people looking for Olympic properties. So people searching for how to rent a house during the Olympics or how to rent a room during the Olympics. Clearly we know that hotel space is going to be very, very quickly exhausted, and it's also likely to be hugely expensive. So people want to understand how else they can stay in and around London during this time. And then what this chart here shows, the sort of the yellow line there is the paid clicks, and the green line is the organic clicks. And so really a phenomenal amount of this growth, of that 300% increase, is coming from organic clicks. So what I wanted to do here is just highlight sort of some of the top search terms that people were putting into Google and Yahoo and Bing, and then also highlight sort of who are the people who were getting that kind of traffic during the sort of first 4 weeks of January. So the interesting thing here, on the right-hand side, these are the companies which I've highlighted in pink, are the sort of your more established players within the property market, the types of Rightmove and Foxtons, and even Gumtree, who you might expect to be picking up quite a lot of traffic during this time. but actually they're hugely outweighed by a whole bunch of sort of random websites, new websites which have been created specifically to target this market. And so if we look at the top recipient, rent during the games.com is only going to be applicable really for people who want to rent a house during the games, or even leasing 2012 rentals. You know, that's a very specific URL, but so much traffic here is going to these websites. So they've really jumped on the bandwagon of what's emerging in the market. There's a demand for people wanting to rent houses or rent flats during the Olympics, and these are the people who have reacted quickly to make sure that they're being successful in picking up that traffic. It's always quite interesting for us to go back and have a look at what we did last time. So this is some of the insight that we pulled out from the 2008 Olympics. It's also sort of quite scary for us to look at how the branding has changed and how ugly some of these charts look in retrospect. But so two sort of other key insights from the last Olympics which were quite interesting. If you cast your mind back, I'm sure you'll remember the British cycling team was hugely successful in 2008. So on the back of Chris Hoy's 3 gold medals in Beijing, that had a huge effect on cycling in the UK. And in fact, we saw 36% increase in visits to cycling stores like Halfords, Wiggle and Chain Reactions, as people wanted to start taking up cycling off the back of the fact that we did incredibly well in the medal tally there. Second sort of insight that we took, searches for Adidas, which was the sort of official kit sponsor for the GB team at the time, also peaked during the games. So they received more searches during the Olympics than they did at any other time during 2008. So that sort of rounds up the sort of the search element. The next thing to concentrate on is the different marketing channels and affiliates, which you can understand as how are sources of traffic changing. How can you make sure that you maximize where your traffic is coming from to make sure that you're getting the best returns for your investment. So in this case, I wanted to have a look at sort of how quickly things can change online by looking back at something which happened in the last World Cup. I'm sure many of you will remember how disastrously England performed in the last World Cup, but it's quite interesting to see sort of how what a profound effect it had on the UK search behaviour during the tournament and then immediately after the tournament. And really what this shows is that a lot of sort of internet traffic was quite suppressed as long as England remained in the World Cup. That sort of third light blue bar shows that the moment we got knocked out, people immediately started going to travel websites, in particular to agencies and to destination and accommodation websites. So you can see that they started wanting to book holidays the moment that they knew that there was no reason to hang around in England anymore to watch the football, whereas they started gambling less, buying less alcohol and going to football sites a lot less, maybe because they were quite depressed at how badly we'd done. And so I wanted to so draw this back to the Olympics and say how our varying traffic levels affect the way that we should be doing business online. In this example, what I've done is have a look at the daily visits to the London 2012 ticket website, and you can see that there are sort of 3 big peaks there. The first one occurred in February when the ticket website was first launched. Then a little bit later in March 2011, when ticket applications were first opened to the public, there was sort of a second spike to the website, and then we saw this massive spike here around April when the ticket application deadline closed. Now, the reason why that's so significant is that during that day, 1 in every 400 visits online went to the Olympic ticketing website, which is pretty phenomenal in itself. But just to put that into context of sort of how significant that is, that's the equivalent of 13 times as much traffic as Ticketmaster gets. And Ticketmaster, bearing in mind, is the #1 ticketing website in the UK by quite some margin. That is an awful lot of traffic going for people wanting to buy Olympic tickets. So why was the ticketing website so successful? Well, a lot of it we can tell by having a look at sort of how the change in traffic in where the sort of traffic was coming from really sort of does tell its own story. So first of all, if you look at the blue bars, so in the run-up to the ticketing deadline in March, the website was receiving a lot of traffic from sports websites, so advertising on things like BBC Sport or a lot of the sort of the media paper sports sites. It was getting a lot of its traffic from email and from social media and other news sites. But then when we sort of flick forward to April, there was a dynamic shift away from those sources of traffic, and actually the sort of the vast majority of traffic coming to the ticketing website was coming from search. So 37% of all of the visits in April going to the 2012 ticketing website were coming from search engines. So there was an initial sort of advertising go in the months preceding the deadline, when they were pushing out emails, when they were interacting with social in order to get people interested, but then very much sort of a focus on search in the month when people were actually wanting to submit their applications for the ticketing. And I wanted to highlight sort of a slightly more unusual example of how even a sort of a brand which perhaps wouldn't necessarily be thought of as being that sexy around the Olympics, Lloyds TSB, can really still embrace a channel like social media and get a phenomenal amount of traffic from it. So Lloyds set up a London 2012 microsite, and what I've done here is have a look at the sort of three main sources of traffic to that website. So in the yellow line you've got traffic coming from email going to the microsite, the purple line is traffic coming from search, and the green line is traffic coming from social media. Now, at the end of August, the Lloyds TSB microsite was getting 35% of all of its visits coming from social networks, and that's quite unusual for even a website which is heavily investing in social media, but particularly for a brand like Lloyds, that is quite exceptional. And then we have a look at why that might be. You can see that Lloyds have really sort of capitalized on the opportunity of the Olympics to do something which it wouldn't necessarily normally be able to do. So because of its affiliation with the Olympics, it started its torchbearer campaign. It got people to upload photos carrying the torch onto its Facebook page. It got a number of celebrities. On the right hand side we've got One Direction there. They got celebrities involved, and then they also had exclusive YouTube clips also embedded into their Facebook page, all driving traffic, all in order to sort of raise the Lloyds profile, but also to help drive traffic to the new website. So what was the overall effect of this? So 8% of all visits leaving the Lloyds TSB microsite in August click through to another part of the Lloyds TSB website. And that's a great result for Lloyds TSB, but in particular, half of those visits had never been to Lloyds TSB website before. And that's why it's sort of really a great example of how you can attract new people to your website. This is a new channel for Lloyds, which perhaps they wouldn't necessarily have engaged with before, but they got an extraordinary sort of uptake of new potential customers who are going to take out perhaps a credit card or an ISA or a new service with their brand. And the final thing which I wanted to talk about today is demographics. So how can you make sure that you're engaging with the right kind of audience in the run-up to the to a big event like the Olympics. Someone who's much smarter than me, this was a quote from the former Chief Marketing Officer at McDonald's. He said that it no longer makes sense for us to spend advertising messages to try and reach going out to the many in order to try and persuade the few. I think really what that's trying to say is targeting is the best way in order to make sure that you're getting your message to the right people at the right time. Historically, we've seen people go with this massive sort of scattergun approach, and actually that's not the smartest way to approach advertising online anymore. And so the way forward is to use demographics, and clearly Hitwise and Experian has access to a phenomenal amount of demographics data which can make your advertising that much more targeted. One of the things which I wanted to highlight here is that visits to the Olympics websites, looking at the regional demographics is quite interesting. So people who are particularly interested in visiting the various sort of different Olympics websites tend to come from London and the southeast. And you can see that sort of outside of that hub, people start to, there's a sort of a diminishing effect the further away we get from the sort of the central hub of London. And therefore, so people in the southwest and the east of the country are sort of quite interested, then sort of interest starts to diminish slightly when we get to the west and east Midlands. But the further north we go, up into the northeast and Scotland, actually sort of people are less interested in the Olympic websites. The other thing that you can do, obviously with Experian, we have our own in-house classification and system which we call Mosaic. Mosaic, for those of you who don't know, is a sort of a raft of different data points. So we have about 450 individual metrics which we can benchmark the UK population against. And that can be anything from where they live in the country to what their average household income is to what car they drive or how many holidays they take a year. And so using this data we can understand what kinds of people, what types of people are visiting certain websites, and then we can also find out where else they go online so that you can help to target those people better. So what I've done here is have a look at sort of where are the demographics for people who are visiting Olympic websites online, and I've benchmarked that against the online population as a whole. So the online average would be 100 in this spider diagram, that's the blue line, and then the red line here is the index of whether people are more or less likely to visit the websites from the different demographic groups which we've got. And sort of the key thing to highlight here is that the groups which are more likely to be interested in the Olympics are the liberal opinions, alpha territory, and professional rewards groups. And very sort of broadly speaking, these are the more affluent members of society in the UK. They are either already sort of high earners or people who are well established in sort of good jobs and living in the smarter parts of the country, or they're sort of the younger aspiring sort of leaders of tomorrow, and that's sort of particularly for the liberal opinions group. They're the people who are going to be the sort of the managers and the business leaders of the future. So we wanted to zone in and just have a look at one group in particular. Alpha territory is the group which over-indexes the most for visits to the Olympic website. But what's crucial about this, they're also the most affluent group online, and we can pick out some of the sort of the key highlights and data points which I mentioned earlier. So this group typically has an average household income of £50,000 a year or more. They over-index on taking 3, 4 or 5 holidays, and on those holidays they're much more likely to spend over £2,500 per person per holiday. And so therefore when we are looking at like who are going to be the people who you'd want to target around the Olympics, who can afford to have a sort of a London hotel and buy tickets for the games, this would be an ideal group to go after to make sure that they could absolutely afford the products that you wanted to sell. And so, as I mentioned, what the sort of great thing that we can do, once we've identified a sort of a key group which you want to target, we can then tell you a lot more about that group and what their online habits are like. And so on the right-hand side, I've sort of picked out some of the key things which they're interested in. So they like Brand Republic, they like going to the theatre, they sort of read Time Out, so they're quite sort of London focused. In terms of their sort of social media likes, they're very sort of engaged on Twitter. They like LinkedIn, and they'll visit YouTube. And then there's sort of what kind of papers they read. They're interested in the Telegraph and the Guardian and the New York Times. On the left-hand side, what I've got here is a look at the top shopping websites which Alpha Territory visit. And so the key thing here to understand is that, of course, they visit the same websites which everybody else does, so the likes of eBay, Amazon, and Argos. But really, what's more interesting is having a look at the index bar, and what that shows is not necessarily the volume, but where Alpha Territories are more likely to shop than the online average. And so these three shops which I've highlighted here, John Lewis, M&S, and Topshop, are where Alpha Territory are much more likely than other online demographic segments to go shopping, and therefore you can understand where they like to go shopping, where are they going to go online, and this is potential sort of affiliates or targeting partners. That's just about it for this webinar. So some of the key takeaways of the things which I've been talking about today. Adapting to search trends is a key sort of thing in the run-up to any big event, but particularly for the Olympics. Search, we very much call the window into the soul of the online population. What we mean by that is that consumers tell you an awful lot about their needs, wants, and desires through the things that they search for. So by using the historical trends of what people are searching for, you can predict what's going to happen in the future, or as we saw with the property rental example, you can understand exactly what's happening almost in real time and jump on those emerging trends very quickly to make sure that you're capitalizing on the traffic when something is changing. Monitoring the key traffic channels is going to be obviously a very significant driver for you. You want to understand who are the key sources of traffic. Are you getting a lot of traffic from search, from email, or from social? And then you can adjust your spend or your strategy in order to make sure that you're getting the most out of the right channels at the right time to make sure that your overall marketing strategy is going to be stronger. And finally, identifying the right audience is crucial. So we've talked about how that scattergun approach isn't really the smartest way to go about making sure that you get the right message in front of the right people at the right time. Using demographics data that we have Experian, in particular the Mosaic demographics, really gives you a very solid and very flexible system which allows you to go after people who are exactly your core demographics, and how you can find more people like that online. A final plug from me, we have a lot of resources available to us. If you want to find out more about what we're talking about in terms of how to do campaign planning and things, you can look at other webinars on our website, which is hitwise.com/UK. You can follow us on Twitter, which is at hitwise_UK. You can go to the blog, or you can download some of our white papers, including one which we've done recently on online video, which is looking at the impact of YouTube and Vimeo on the way that people interact online. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a good afternoon.